I never expected to be standing in the lobby of Mitchell Financial Solutions as its new owner. The receptionist who once refused to schedule meetings with me now greeted me with, "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell." The irony wasn't lost on me as I walked past the etched glass bearing my family name, a name my father once told me I would never live up to. My father's voice still echoes in my memory. "You'll never amount to anything with those ridiculous ideas." The words were delivered across a polished mahogany dinner table, crystal glasses clinking as uncomfortable silence fell over our family gathering. That moment changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Growing up in Brookline as the only son of Victor Mitchell meant expectations were always stratospheric. Our Tudor-style home with its manicured gardens and imported furniture wasn't just a place to live, it was a statement. My father had built Mitchell Financial Solutions from nothing into one of Boston's most respected investment firms. His clients included tech moguls, old money families, and ambitious startups looking for their big break. To the outside world, Victor Mitchell was a financial wizard, a self-made success story who commanded respect in every room he entered. At home, he was a taskmaster. My childhood was mapped out like one of his investment strategies: prestigious private school, summer internships at financial institutions, extracurricular activities chosen not for enjoyment, but for their resume building. Potential. "Legacy is everything, Daniel," he would remind me during our Sunday morning lectures disguised as breakfast. "The Mitchell name opens doors, but you have to be worthy of walking through them." My mother, Elaine, elegant and reserved, would squeeze my hand under the table during these sessions. Her silent support was the only thing that made them bearable. "Your father wants what's best for you," she would whisper later. "His methods are harsh because the world is harsh." I nodded and pretended to understand, but something inside me rebelled against the predetermined path laid out before me. While my father was obsessed with traditional wealth management, I was fascinated by emerging financial technologies. During my sophomore year at Boston College, I started developing an algorithm that could democratize investment strategies typically reserved for the ultra-wealthy. I spent nights coding in my dorm room, fueled by convenience store coffee and the conviction that finance shouldn't be gatekept by firms like my father's. My roommate thought I was crazy. "Dude, your dad runs one of the biggest firms in the city. Just take the silver spoon and be grateful," he said one night, watching me hunched over my laptop at 3 a.m. But it wasn't about rejecting my father's world. It was about evolving it. When I came home for Thanksgiving break during my junior year, I was buzzing with excitement to share my ideas. The algorithm was still rudimentary, but its potential was undeniable. I'd even secured a small grant from the university's innovation fund to develop it further. The Mitchell family Thanksgiving was always a performance. My mother spent days planning the menu, the flowers, the table settings. My father invited key business associates, a tradition he maintained to strengthen relationships outside the office. That year, Harrison Wells, my father's longtime business partner, and Gregory Thompson, their newest executive hire from a rival firm, joined us. I waited until dessert was served, my mother's famous pumpkin cheesecake, before broaching the subject. "I've been working on something I think could revolutionize how Mitchell Financial approaches client portfolios," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. My father cut a precise slice of cheesecake. "Oh? And what would that be, Daniel?" I outlined my algorithm, how it could analyze market trends more efficiently than traditional methods, how it could be scaled to serve clients with more modest portfolios, how it could position Mitchell Financial at the forefront of the industry's inevitable digital transformation. The table fell silent. Harrison looked intrigued, Gregory uncomfortable. My mother nervously rearranged her silverware. My father dabbed his mouth with his napkin, a gesture I knew preceded his most cutting remarks. "So you're suggesting we lower our standards to chase smaller clients?" Dilute our brand with some unproven tech gimmick? His laugh was sharp, dismissive. This is exactly why I worry about the future of this company. You have no understanding of what we've built. I tried to explain that it wasn't about lowering standards but expanding reach. He cut me off. Daniel, stick to your studies. Leave business innovation to those who understand business. He turned to Gregory. Thompson here doubled the porter. Account last quarter using strategies that have stood the test of time, not some college coding project. Gregory looked embarrassed but managed a tight smile. But Dad, financial technology is the future. If Mitchell Financial doesn't adapt, you'll never amount to anything with those ridiculous ideas. My father interrupted, voice raised. You think a few months of coding makes you an expert? This company has thrived for 25 years because we understand value, tradition, relationships. Things you clearly don't grasp. The crystal glasses seemed to vibrate with the tension. Harrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. My mother whispered, "Victor, please." But my father wasn't finished. If you want to play with apps and algorithms, fine. But don't expect to bring that nonsense into my company. Mitchell Financial will remain a premium service for premium clients under my watch. I sat there, humiliation burning through me. Not just because my father had dismissed my ideas, but because he'd done it so publicly, so completely. In that moment, something crystallized within me, a determination that would fuel everything that followed. After dinner, as guests were leaving, Harrison Wells pulled me aside in the hallway. "Your father is brilliant at what he does, but he has blind spots," he said quietly. "Don't give up on your idea. The industry is changing whether Victor wants to admit it or not." His words were a small comfort, but not enough to heal the rift that had opened. That night, I made a decision. I would no longer try to earn my place at Mitchell Financial. I would build something of my own. Upon returning to campus, I threw myself into my project with renewed intensity. I stopped coming home for weekend dinners. My mother called, concerned, but I assured her I was just busy with studies. The truth was, I couldn't bear to sit across from my father, knowing what he really thought of me and my potential. During spring break, instead of going home, I visited my Uncle Frank in Portland, Maine. Unlike my father, Frank had chosen a different path. After working on Wall Street for a decade, he'd opened a small consulting firm focused on helping local businesses manage their finances. He lived in a modest house near the water, drove a 10-year-old car, and seemed happier than anyone in my father's circle. "Your algorithm has promise," he said after I demonstrated an early prototype. We were sitting on his deck, watching sailboats drift across the harbor. "But tech alone won't differentiate you. You need to understand the human element, why people trust certain advisors with their money, what keeps them up at night." Uncle Frank became my mentor, teaching me aspects of financial advising that couldn't be learned in classrooms or coding sessions. He introduced me to his clients, small business owners, teachers with pension funds, young families planning for college costs. I listened to their stories, their concerns, their hopes for the future. These conversations shaped my understanding in ways my father's lectures never had. "Your father isn't wrong about everything," Frank told me one evening. "Relationships do matter, trust matters, but he's wrong to think innovation threatens those things. The right technology can strengthen relationships, build trust through transparency. That's your advantage. You understand both worlds." After graduation, I declined my father's perfunctory offer of an entry-level position at Mitchell Financial. Instead, I accepted a job at Meridian Advisors, a mid-sized firm known for its progressive approach. My father was livid. "Working for the competition? This is how you repay everything we've done for you?" he demanded during a tense phone call. "It's not about competition, Dad. It's about learning in an environment that values new ideas." "You're making a mistake," he said before hanging up. We barely spoke for the next year. At Meridian, I continued refining my algorithm while learning the practical aspects of the business. My boss recognized my potential and gave me increasing responsibility. By my second year, I was managing several key accounts and had been featured in a financial magazine as an emerging talent to watch. I still remember my mother calling after that article was published. "Your father saw it," she said. "He didn't say anything, but he kept the magazine open on his desk all day. I think he's proud, in his way." I doubted it. Victor Mitchell wasn't one for silent pride. If he approved of something, you knew it. His silence spoke volumes. During this time, I reconnected with Sophia Chen, a former classmate who was working for a tech incubator. Over coffee, I shared my vision for a platform that would combine my algorithm with user-friendly interfaces and educational tools. "This isn't just a product, it's a mission," I explained. "Financial literacy and access shouldn't be luxury items." Sophia's eyes lit up. "You should apply to our next cohort. The incubator provides seed funding, mentorship, office space, everything. You need to get started." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The prospect of leaving my stable job to launch a startup was terrifying. I'd be walking away from a promising career, a regular paycheck, the safety net I'd built. But something Uncle Frank once said kept coming back to me. "Comfort is the enemy of greatness." I applied to the incubator and was accepted. 2 weeks later, I resigned from Meridian. The first year of building FinMinder, my financial technology platform, was the hardest of my life. 16-hour days, countless pitches to skeptical investors, technical challenges that seemed insurmountable. Sophia joined as my co-founder, bringing her expertise in user experience design and marketing. We worked out of a cramped office with mismatched furniture and unreliable Wi-Fi, a far cry from the polished environment of Mitchell Financial. My father, predictably, thought I'd lost my mind. "Playing entrepreneur with your college project," he scoffed during one of our rare conversations. "While you're burning through investor money, Gregory Thompson has been promoted to senior VP. He's doing something meaningful with his career." Those words stung, but they also fueled me. Every time doubt crept in, I remembered that Thanksgiving dinner, the dismissal in my father's voice. It became my personal rocket fuel. FinMinder gained traction slowly at first. Small businesses appreciated our transparent fee structure and intuitive platform. Individual users valued the educational components that demystified investing. Our user base grew steadily, and with it, our credibility in the industry. Then came the turning point. A major tech publication featured FinMinder in a cover story about financial democratization. The article praised our innovative approach and positioned us as leaders in the emerging fintech revolution. Overnight, our user numbers tripled. Investor interest skyrocketed. I sent the article to my father without comment. He never acknowledged receiving it. As FinMinder expanded, we moved to proper offices in downtown Boston, just 6 blocks from Mitchell Financial's headquarters. Sometimes, walking to lunch, I'd see my father through the windows of his favorite restaurant, holding court with clients or colleagues. I never went in. 3 years after launching, FinMinder secured Series B funding at a valuation that made headlines in the financial press. Our platform was serving over 100,000 users, from individual investors to medium-sized businesses. We'd expanded our team to 40 employees and were planning to open offices in New York and Chicago. It was around this time that I began hearing rumors about Mitchell Financial. Nothing specific at first, just whispers that they were losing younger clients to more tech-savvy competitors, that their refusal to adapt was starting to affect their bottom line, that Victor Mitchell's leadership style, once considered authoritative, was increasingly seen as outdated. I took no pleasure in these rumors. Despite everything, I didn't want to see my father's legacy crumble. During a rare family dinner, my mother had insisted, as it was her birthday, I tried to broach the subject. Dad, if you're interested, I'd be happy to walk you through how FinMinder's systems might be adapted for Mitchell Financial's client base. My father's expression hardened. We're doing just fine without your help, Daniel. Our clients value personal relationships, not chatbots and algorithms. It's not an either-or proposition, I argued. The best firms are combining both approaches. When I want business advice, I'll ask Gregory Thompson, not my son who's playing startup with his friends. My mother intervened, changing the subject to safer territory. But the exchange left me troubled. My father's stubbornness wasn't just affecting our relationship. It was potentially endangering the company he'd built. The following quarter, industry news confirmed my fears. Mitchell Financial reported its first significant client loss in 15 years. Several major accounts had moved to competitors offering more comprehensive digital services. The firm's stock, which had traded privately among a select group of investors, lost nearly 20% of its value. I reached out to Harrison Wells, who was still my father's partner. We met discreetly at a cafe in Cambridge, far from financial district eyes. It's worse than the reports suggest, Harrison admitted, looking weary. Victor refuses to acknowledge the problem. When the executive team proposed a digital transformation initiative, he dismissed it outright. Gregory Thompson is the only one he listens to, and Gregory just tells him what he wants to hear. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Harrison studied me carefully. Because despite everything, I know you care about the firm, and because you were right all those years ago at Thanksgiving. We should have listened. What Harrison told me next stunned me. Several board members were quietly discussing a leadership change. Victor Mitchell, the man who had built the company from nothing, was at risk of being forced out. I spent the next week in turmoil. My father and I had our differences, but I couldn't stand by and watch as his life's work was taken from him. At the same time, the company's direction needed to change if it was going to survive in the modern financial landscape. After days of deliberation, I made what might have been the most difficult decision of my life. I called an emergency meeting with FinMinder's board and executive team to propose something radical, an acquisition offer for Mitchell Financial Solutions. The synergies are obvious, I explained, standing before them in our conference room. Their established client relationships and our technological infrastructure, their expertise in high-net-worth portfolio management, and our accessibility to broader markets. Together, we could create something unprecedented in the industry. Sophia looked skeptical. Daniel, are you sure this isn't personal? Acquiring? Your father's struggling company is complicated. It's business, I insisted, even as I knew it wasn't entirely true. Mitchell Financial's client roster alone is worth the acquisition price. And yes, there's a personal element. I believe in what that company could be if it embraced innovation without losing its core values. After hours of discussion, the board conditionally approved my plan. We would make an offer, contingent, on due diligence and financing arrangements. I decided to approach Harrison first, rather than my father. Harrison agreed to present the offer to the board but warned me. Victor will fight this with everything he has. To him, this won't be a merger or an acquisition, it will be a surrender. He was right. When Mitchell Financial's board voted to consider FinMinder's offer, largely due to pressure from concerned investors, my father called me for the first time in months. Is this your idea of revenge? He demanded, his voice shaking with anger. Using your little tech company to try and swallow up what I've spent my life building? This isn't about revenge, Dad. It's about saving Mitchell Financial. Your company is losing clients, market share, relevance. Together, we could— I'd rather shut the doors than sell to you, he interrupted. The board may be wavering, but This is still my company. I still have control. What my father didn't know was that his control was more tenuous than he realized. Several key shareholders, concerned about the company's direction, had already indicated their support for the acquisition. The numbers were tilting in Finminder's favor. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, legal consultations, and financial analyses. Mitchell Financial's board scheduled a final vote on our offer. The day before that vote, I requested a private meeting with my father. We met at the Charles Hotel, Neutral Territory. My father looked older than I remembered, the lines in his face deeper, his posture less commanding. For a moment, my resolve wavered. "You have 30 minutes, he said as we sat down, though I'm not sure what's left to discuss. I slid a folder across the table. "These are the terms of the acquisition. I wanted you to hear directly from me what they mean for you and for the company." He didn't open the folder. "I know what acquisitions mean. The dismantling of everything I've built. My name reduced to a footnote in your press releases." "That's not what this is," I insisted. "The Mitchell name stays. The core values of client service and trust remain central to our mission. And you," I took a deep breath, "you would remain as chairman emeritus. Your relationships, your expertise, they're assets, not liabilities." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across my father's face. "Why would you want me involved at all, after everything?" This was the hardest part to articulate, even to myself. "Because despite our differences, what you built matters. Your work ethic, your commitment to clients, those things shaped me, even as I found my own path. This isn't about erasing you, Dad. It's about building on your foundation." My father finally opened the folder, scanning the terms with the practiced eye of someone who had reviewed countless contracts. "And if I refuse? If I fight this to the bitter end?" "Then we proceed with the board vote tomorrow. Based on the shareholder commitments we've secured, Finminder will likely gain control. But it would be messier, more public, and the terms would be less favorable for everyone, especially you." He closed the folder. "You've become quite the businessman." I couldn't tell if it was an insult or a compliment, perhaps both. "I'll consider these terms," he said finally. "That's all I can promise." The board meeting the next day was tense. My father arrived early, speaking quietly with board members. I waited in an anteroom, reviewing our presentation one last time with Sophia and our legal team. When we were called in, I was surprised to see my father standing at the head of the table. "Before we proceed with the vote," he announced, "I have something to say." The room fell silent. I braced myself for one final act of defiance. "After careful consideration, I am recommending that the board accept Finminder's acquisition offer, with the amendments outlined in the revised terms provided this morning." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the room. I caught Harrison's eye. He looked as shocked as I felt. "Mitchell Financial Solutions was built on the principle of doing what's best for our clients," my father continued. "Sometimes that means recognizing when change is necessary. This merger," he emphasized the word, rejecting acquisition, "represents the best path forward for our clients, our employees, and our shareholders." The vote that followed was unanimous in favor of the deal. As the room cleared, my father approached me. "The amendments to the terms," he said. "I assume you've reviewed them?" I nodded. His revisions were minor, mainly focused on employee, retention guarantees, and client communication protocols. "Good," he said. "Then we have an agreement. I expect you to honor it." "I will," I promised. He turned to leave, then paused. "That algorithm you were so excited about at Thanksgiving years ago, does it still work like you said it would?" "Better, actually. We've refined it significantly since then." Something like regret passed across his face. I should have listened. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him. 3 months later, I stood in the lobby of what was now officially Mitchell Finminder Solutions. The merged company retained the Mitchell name as promised, but incorporated Finminder's technology and approach to client service. The transition hadn't been seamless. Integrations never are. But the initial results exceeded expectations. Client retention was strong, and new accounts were coming in at an unprecedented rate. My father, in his role as chairman emeritus, was more engaged than I'd anticipated. He focused on maintaining key client relationships while gradually embracing the technological tools he'd once dismissed. Occasionally, he even offered suggestions for improving our platforms based on his decades of experience. We weren't suddenly a warm, demonstrative father-son duo. Decades of tension don't dissolve overnight. But there was a growing mutual respect that hadn't existed before. 6 months after the merger, we launched a new service specifically designed for next-generation investors, children of our traditional high-net-worth clients who were beginning to manage their own portfolios. The launch event was held at our headquarters, with industry analysts and media in attendance. As I prepared to address the crowd, I noticed my father standing in the back of the room. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave me a slight nod, subtle, but unmistakable recognition. I stepped to the podium. "Welcome to the future of Mitchell Finminder Solutions," I began. "A future that honors tradition while embracing innovation, that values relationships while leveraging technology, that remains exclusive in our service quality while becoming inclusive in our reach." Looking out at the assembled faces, our combined teams, our clients, the press, I added, "This is what happens when we refuse to accept limitations on what we can accomplish, when we recognize that the most powerful legacy isn't preserving the past but building the future." From the back of the room, I saw my father listening intently. For the first time in my life, I wasn't striving to prove him wrong or earn his approval. I was simply leading the company we now shared into its next chapter, a company that bore our family name, but belonged equally to everyone who had helped build it. Later that evening, as the event wound down, my father approached me with 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed me one and raised his in a small toast. "To amounting to something after all," he said quietly. It wasn't an effusive apology or a dramatic reconciliation. It was something more valuable: acknowledgement, recognition of the journey that had brought us here, from that painful Thanksgiving dinner to this moment of shared accomplishment. I raised my glass in return to building something together. As I look back now, I realize that success didn't come from proving my father wrong. It came from staying true to my vision, even when the easiest path would have been to give up or conform. It came from recognizing that his dismissal of my potential didn't have to define my future. Sometimes the words that wound us most deeply become the foundation of our greatest achievements. Not because we're seeking revenge or validation, but because they push us to discover what we're truly capable of creating. The company continues to grow, evolving in ways neither my father nor I could have predicted alone. The Mitchell legacy lives on, not as an untouchable monument to the past, but as a living, breathing enterprise that combines the best of what was with the promise of what could be. And that, I believe, is the most meaningful success of all. If this story resonated with you, I'd love for you to join our community. Hit that subscribe button below and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Share your own stories of overcoming doubters in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, sometimes the people who say you'll never amount to anything give you exactly the motivation you need to prove them wrong. The Mitchell family home in Brookline wasn't just a house, it was a fortress of expectations. 3 stories of brick and Tudor beams surrounded by hedges trimmed with such precision they might have been cut with surgical tools. I remember the sound my shoes made on the marble foyer every time I returned from school, a sharp click that announced my presence. demanding I stand a little straighter before my father emerged from his study to assess my day. Victor Mitchell wasn't a man who believed in small talk. "Results, Daniel," he would say, extending his hand for my report card or test scores. "The world measures men by their results." There was never a day when results weren't expected. Even weekends were structured around achievement. Tennis lessons with Coach Barrett on Saturday mornings. "The Williams boy is already playing at state level, Daniel. I expect you to match him by spring." Followed by Chinese language classes. International finance requires global communication skills. And Sunday afternoons with Mr. Grayson, a retired investment banker who tutored me in economic principles while other kids played video games or rode bikes. I once asked my mother why we couldn't go to the beach like my friend Jason's family. She smoothed my hair with a gentle hand. "Your father believes in preparation," she said. "He doesn't want you to struggle like he did." This was a familiar refrain, how Victor Mitchell had clawed his way from nothing, the son of a factory worker in Worcester, who had died before seeing his son graduate high school. How he'd worked nights to put himself through Boston College, living on ramen noodles and determination, securing his first finance job through sheer persistence, showing up at the firm every day for 2 weeks until they relented and gave him an interview. It was a powerful origin story, one my father wielded like both shield and sword, protection against criticism of his methods, and a weapon to cut down any complaint about the regimen he'd created for me. How could I argue with someone who had overcome such odds? What right did I have to feel burdened when I'd been given every advantage he'd been denied? The pressure was relentless, but there were moments of warmth in our household. My mother, Elaine, created little islands of normalcy whenever she could. Sunday morning pancakes shaped like animals, secret trips to the ice cream parlor when my father worked late, the antique piano in the living room where she taught me to play Chopin by ear, both of us laughing when I hit wrong notes. "Music builds mathematical thinking," she would say if my father walked in, translating joy into terms he might accept as productive. My father wasn't a cruel man, just a single-minded one. He truly believed he was preparing me for success in the only way he understood it. When I brought home perfect scores, rare moments of approval lit his stern face. "That's my boy," he would say, a phrase I collected like precious stones, storing each one carefully in my memory to revisit during the far more frequent moments of criticism. Dinner at the Mitchell household was a performance every night, but especially when guests were present, my mother would spend hours preparing, not just the food, but the atmosphere. The right flowers in crystal vases, the correct vintage from the wine cellar, place settings arranged with military precision. I learned proper table etiquette before I learned to ride a bike. "In business, Daniel, deals are made over meals as often as in boardrooms," my father explained. "A man who knows how to conduct himself at dinner will never be at a disadvantage." These dinner parties were my introduction to the world of finance, a world populated by men in expensive suits who spoke in code about leverage and liquidity, market corrections and capital gains, women in designer dresses who smiled tightly while discussing charity galas and school admissions, their conversation no less strategic than their husbands. I observed it all silently from my place at the table, learning the unspoken hierarchies, the subtle ways influence was wielded through seemingly casual comments about market trends or offhand mentions of conversations with government officials. Harrison Wells was a fixture at these gatherings, my father's partner since the early days of Mitchell Financial. Where my father was all sharp edges and intensity, Harrison was smooth surfaces and easy charm. "The perfect combination," I overheard my mother tell a friend once. "Victor closes the deals, Harrison makes the clients feel good about signing." Harrison always brought me books, not the financial tomes my father stocked my shelves with, but novels, biographies, once even a book of poetry. "A broad mind makes better investments," he would wink, slipping them to me as if passing contraband. My father tolerated these gifts with pursed lips, but never commented directly. School was another arena for expected excellence. Lakeview Preparatory wasn't just expensive, it was exclusive, accepting only students with both academic credentials and family connections. The campus resembled a small college, with Gothic stone buildings and carefully manicured quads. Here, performance was measured not just by grades, but by an intricate social calculus of which extracurricular activities carried prestige, which summer programs opened doors, which teachers had connections to which universities. I was good at the game, not because I loved it, but because failure wasn't an option in Victor Mitchell's household. I maintained a 4.0 GPA, captained the debate team, played varsity tennis, and joined the investment club, where we managed a mock portfolio that consistently outperformed the market. On paper, I was exactly the son my father had designed me to be. But there were cracks in the perfect facade, moments when another version of Daniel Mitchell emerged, like when Mr. Harrington, my computer science teacher, introduced us to programming in junior year. I found myself staying late in the computer lab, losing track of time as I created increasingly complex algorithms. There was something about the elegant logic of code, the way it built worlds from nothing but thought, that resonated with me in ways balance sheets never had. I kept this passion mostly to myself, knowing it wouldn't fit into my father's blueprint. When I did mention my computer science projects during a family dinner, my father frowned slightly. Useful skills, I suppose, but remember where your focus should be. The people who make real money aren't the ones writing code. They're the ones hiring people to write code. It was a typical Victor Mitchell perspective, always looking at the world through the lens of hierarchy and leverage. Who works for whom? Who controls capital? Who sits at the top of which pyramid? Yet something about this dismissal stung more than usual. Perhaps because I'd found genuine joy in creating something, only to have it reduced to a checkbox on a career strategy. That night, I made a small decision that would later seem significant. I registered for an additional programming class without telling my father, dropping a free period I usually spent in the library preparing for the following day's economics seminar. This small act of independence was exhilarating. Twice a week, in that classroom with its humming computers and fluorescent lights, I wasn't the Mitchell heir with his predetermined path. I was just Daniel, solving puzzles, building systems, experimenting with creation rather than acquisition. Mrs. Chen, our programming teacher, noticed my enthusiasm. "You have a natural talent for this," she told me after I'd completed an assignment in half the allocated time. "Have you considered studying computer science in college?" I laughed nervously. "My future's pretty much set in finance." She gave me a long look. "Daniel, the financial world is being transformed by technology. The next generation of successful finance professionals will understand both worlds." She recommended additional resources, online courses, forums where serious programmers shared ideas, books on emerging financial technologies. "Just something to think about," she said with a knowing smile. Those words planted a seed that would grow quietly over the next years. As I went through the motions of being Victor Mitchell's son, the college applications to Ivy League schools, the summer internship at Goldman Sachs arranged through my father's connections, the carefully curated extracurricular activities, another version of myself was developing in parallel. This shadow Daniel devoured articles about blockchain and algorithmic trading, spent nights learning Python and Java, and began sketching ideas for systems that could democratize investment strategies traditionally reserved for the wealthy. Boston. College was my father's alma mater, so despite acceptance letters from Harvard and Princeton, there was never any real question about where I would go. "Legacy matters," my father insisted. "The Mitchell name already opens doors at BC." My first week on campus, 3 different professors mentioned my father, his donations to the business school, his guest lectures in finance classes, the trading floor simulator he'd funded in the new economics building. College should have been liberation, distance from my father's daily scrutiny, freedom to explore new interests. Instead, I found myself in an extension of his kingdom, surrounded by his influence. I dutifully declared a finance major, joined the investment club, pledged the same fraternity he had 30 years earlier. During family dinners, I reported my activities and grades like a field agent checking in with headquarters. But college also brought unexpected connections and influences. My roommate, Eric, was a computer science major who spent hours passionately discussing the future of technology. Finance is being completely disrupted, he argued during late-night conversations. The big established players are dinosaurs who don't see the meteor coming. Then there was Professor Latimer, who taught a seminar on financial innovation. Unlike most of the business school faculty who spoke reverently of traditional models, Latimer challenged orthodoxy. The democratization of finance is inevitable, he declared in his first lecture. The question isn't whether the industry will transform, but who will lead that transformation. His class introduced me to concepts that seemed almost heretical compared to my father's philosophy. Microfinance initiatives that served populations ignored by traditional banks, community investment funds that prioritized social impact alongside returns, technology platforms making sophisticated investment strategies accessible to average consumers. These influences worked on me slowly, like water shaping stone. I maintained my perfect GPA, but my interests increasingly diverged from the path my father had laid out. My junior year independent research project focused on algorithmic trading models that could be scaled down for retail investors, a topic that combined my secret passion for programming with the financial knowledge I'd been steeped in since childhood. Professor Latimer was impressed. "This has real-world application potential," he said after reviewing my work. "Have you considered developing this commercially?" I shook my head. It's just a theoretical exercise. But it wasn't, not really. In quiet moments between classes or late at night when Eric was asleep, I continued refining the algorithm, building a rudimentary interface, testing it against historical market data. The results were promising, not perfect, but suggesting that with further development, my system could provide smaller investors with strategies typically available only to clients with seven-figure portfolios. My growing confidence in this project coincided with an increasing unease about my predetermined future. After graduation, I was expected to take a position at Mitchell Financial, beginning at the bottom, albeit with an accelerated promotion timeline, to learn the business. From the ground up, my father spoke about it as a foregone conclusion. "When you join the firm," prefaced any discussion about my post-college plans. I never explicitly agreed or disagreed. Instead, I focused on my algorithm, which I'd begun to think of as potentially more than an academic exercise. The seed Mrs. Chen had planted years ago had grown into something I couldn't ignore. What if there was another path? Not a rejection of everything my father had taught me, but an evolution, an adaptation for a changing world. The Thanksgiving of my junior year became the unexpected catalyst for this alternative future. Our Brookline home was in top form. My mother had outdone herself with seasonal decorations, the table a showcase of her impeccable taste with its arrangement of gourds and fall flowers, fine china and silver that had been in her family for generations. The guest list included the usual suspects from my father's professional circle, including Harrison Wells and his wife, plus a new addition, Gregory Thompson, recently poached from a competing firm. Thompson was exactly the kind of executive my father admired: Harvard Business School, impeccable suits, the confident bearing of someone who grew up with money and connections. He spoke in definitive statements rather than suggestions, laughed at the right moments during my father's stories, and brought an impressively expensive bottle of Bordeaux as a host gift. Gregory has increased our high-net-worth client retention by 22% in just his first quarter, my father announced proudly as we took our seats for dinner. The Porter account alone has doubled under his management. I'd heard about the Porter account for years, Old money family, notoriously conservative with their investments, loyal to Mitchell Financial primarily through my father's personal relationship with the family patriarch. That Thompson had expanded their portfolio was genuinely impressive. "What was your approach with the Porters?" I asked, genuinely curious. "They've historically been resistant to growth strategies." Thompson seemed pleased with the question. "Relationships," he said, cutting into his turkey. "At the end of the day, this business is about trust. I spent time getting to know James Porter's priorities beyond just returns, his philanthropic interests, his concerns about legacy. The portfolio expansion came naturally from those conversations." My father nodded approvingly. "This is what I've always taught Daniel. Technical knowledge of markets is the baseline. The real art is in understanding the client." It was a perfect opening for what I'd been hoping to discuss. As my mother served her famous cranberry chutney, I carefully began my pitch. "Speaking of technical knowledge," I said, "I've been developing something that I think could significantly enhance Mitchell Financial's service offerings." I explained my algorithm, how it analyzed market trends more efficiently than traditional methods, how it could be scaled to serve clients with more modest portfolios while maintaining the personalized approach the firm was known for. As I spoke, I watched the faces around the table. Harrison looked genuinely intrigued, leaning forward slightly. My mother wore her supportive smile, though I could see concern in her eyes. She knew my father well enough to anticipate his reaction. Gregory Thompson maintained a neutral expression, but his fingers tapped lightly against his water glass. A tell, I thought, of either interest or discomfort. My father's face gave nothing away until I finished. Then came the napkin dab. That precise gesture I'd seen countless times before difficult conversations with underperforming employees or clients who questioned his strategies. "So you're suggesting we lower our standards to chase smaller clients? Dilute our brand with some unproven tech gimmick?" His laugh carried no warmth. "This is exactly why I worry about the future of this company. You have no understanding of what we've built." The air seemed to crystallize around us. Harrison's wife suddenly found her cranberry sauce fascinating. My mother's hand moved briefly toward mine under the table, then retreated. I tried to recover, to clarify. "It's not about lowering standards, Dad. It's about expanding reach. The financial industry is changing rapidly, and technology—" "Daniel, stick to your studies. Leave business innovation to those who understand business." He turned to Thompson, dismissing me entirely. "Gregory here doubled the Porter account last quarter using strategies that have stood the test of time, not some college coding project." Thompson looked uncomfortable but managed a tight smile. He knew better than to contradict his new boss, especially in front of others. "But, Dad, financial technology is the future. If Mitchell Financial doesn't adapt, you'll never amount to anything with those ridiculous ideas," my father interrupted, his voice raised enough to make the crystal glasses vibrate slightly. "You think a few months of coding makes you an expert? This company has thrived for 25 years because we understand value, tradition, relationships, things you clearly don't grasp." The table fell silent. Harrison cleared his throat awkwardly. My mother whispered, "Victor, please." But my father wasn't finished. His voice lowered, which somehow made it worse, like he was sharing an obvious truth rather than delivering a personal attack. "If you want to play with apps and algorithms, fine. But don't expect to bring that nonsense into my company. Mitchell Financial will remain a premium service for premium clients under my watch." I sat motionless, feeling heat rise in my face. Not just embarrassment at being dressed down in front of my father's colleagues, but something deeper. A burning indignation that my ideas, my passion, my vision for the future could be so completely dismissed by the person whose approval I'd spent my entire life seeking. The conversation moved on, redirected by Harrison to some neutral topic. Market forecasts for the following quarter, I think, though I barely registered the words. I went through the motions of the meal, answering when spoken to, passing dishes when asked. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The invisible thread connecting my future to Mitchell Financial, a thread I'd never seriously questioned despite my growing interest in alternative paths, had snapped cleanly and irrevocably. After dinner, as guests moved to the living room for coffee, Harrison Wells found me in the hallway, ostensibly on his way to the bathroom. "Your father is brilliant at what he does," he said quietly, "but he has blind spots. Vision is often generational." He glanced toward the living room, where my father's laugh carried over the clink of coffee cups. "Don't give up on your idea, Daniel. The industry is changing whether Victor wants to admit it or not." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Harrison's words were kind, but they couldn't erase what had happened. My father had made his position clear. There was no place for my ideas in his world. That night, in my childhood bedroom surrounded by the debate trophies and academic awards that had always defined my worth in my father's eyes, I made a decision. I would no longer try to fit myself into the mold Victor Mitchell had created. I would build something of my own, something that combined what I'd learned from him about finance with my passion for technology, something that would either prove him wrong or render his approval irrelevant. I returned to campus with a new sense of purpose. While maintaining my coursework, I poured additional hours into refining my algorithm, expanding its capabilities, testing its limits. I enlisted Eric's help with some of the more complex coding challenges, explaining my vision for democratizing sophisticated investment strategies. "So you're basically creating the thing that's going to make your dad's business model obsolete?" Eric asked one night, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and takeout containers. "Not obsolete," I corrected. "Evolved. The core principles are still valid. Understanding client needs, building trust, managing risk. I'm just making those benefits accessible to more people." Eric shrugged. "Sounds like disruption to me, but whatever helps you sleep at night." Maybe he was right. Maybe on some level, I was looking to disrupt not just an industry, but a relationship to prove that I could succeed on my own terms, not just as Victor Mitchell's son. But there was something more fundamental driving me now. A genuine belief that finance could be more inclusive without sacrificing quality, that technology could enhance rather than replace the human elements that made good financial advising valuable. I stopped going home for weekend dinners, citing academic commitments. My mother called regularly, concern evident in her voice even as she tried to sound casual. "Your father asks about you," she said during one such call. I doubted this was true, but didn't challenge her. "He's proud of you, Daniel, even if he doesn't always show it." This too, I doubted. Victor Mitchell's pride was never something you had to guess at. It was loudly proclaimed, leveraged like capital. His silence about me now spoke volumes. During spring break, instead of returning to Brookline, I drove to Portland, Maine, to visit my Uncle Frank. My father's younger brother had taken a very different path in life. After a decade on Wall Street, he'd walked away from a lucrative career to start a boutique financial consulting firm focused on helping small businesses and middle-income families. He lived in a modest house near the water, drove a practical car, and seemed happier than anyone in my father's circle. Uncle Frank had always been the family outlier, mentioned rarely and usually with a slight edge in my father's voice that suggested disappointment or disapproval. They weren't estranged exactly, but contact was minimal. I'd seen him only at major family events over the years, but I remembered him as the uncle who asked real questions about my interests rather than my achievements, who brought thoughtful gifts rather than educational ones. I hadn't told him the real purpose of my visit, just that I was in need of a break from campus. He welcomed me warmly, showing me to a simple guest room with a view of the harbor. "Nothing fancy," he said. but the sunrise over the water makes up for the lack of thread count in the sheets. That first evening, sitting on his deck with beers as the sun set, I found myself telling him everything. My passion for coding, my algorithm, the disastrous Thanksgiving dinner, my growing uncertainty about following my father's path. "Uncle." Frank listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or frowning but offering no commentary until I'd finished. Then he took a long sip of his beer and said, "Show me this algorithm of yours." I spent the next hour walking him through the program on my laptop, explaining the underlying principles, demonstrating how it worked with sample portfolios. When I finished, I waited nervously for his verdict. "Your algorithm has promise," he said finally. "The basic premise is sound, but tech alone won't differentiate you in the long run. You need to understand the human element, why people trust certain advisors with their money, what keeps them up at night." This wasn't the response I'd expected. Isn't that exactly what my father would say? That relationships matter more than technology? Frank laughed. "Victor's not wrong about everything. He's built a successful business because he understands client psychology. But he's missing what you see clearly. That technology can scale. That understanding, make it accessible to more people." He took another sip of beer. "What you're missing is his hard-earned knowledge of what clients truly need." The next day, Uncle Frank took me to meet some of his clients, not the ultra-wealthy, families Mitchell Financial catered to, but small business owners, teachers with pension funds, young families planning for college costs. I sat quietly as he reviewed their finances, answered their questions, addressed their concerns. What struck me was how similar these conversations were to what I'd observed in my father's office. The same fears about security, the same hopes for the future, the same need for guidance from someone they trusted. "See what I mean?" Frank asked as we drove back to his house after the final meeting. "The fundamentals of good financial advising don't change with net worth. People want security, growth, understanding. What changes is access. Who gets the benefit of expertise?" Over the next few days, I revised my algorithm, incorporating insights from what I'd observed. Uncle Frank introduced me to more clients, allowed me to sit in on calls, showed me the systems he'd developed to serve a broader client base efficiently without sacrificing personalization. "Your father isn't wrong about everything," he told me our last evening together. "Relationships do matter. Trust matters. But he's wrong to think innovation threatens those things. The right technology can strengthen relationships, build trust through transparency. That's your advantage, Daniel. You understand both worlds." I left Portland with a clearer vision than I'd arrived with. This wasn't about rejecting everything my father had taught me, but about evolving it, combining the best of his world with the possibilities of mine. And I wasn't just driven by rebellion anymore, but by genuine conviction that what I was building could matter, could help people, typically excluded from sophisticated financial guidance. Back at Boston College, I threw myself into my final year with renewed purpose. I maintained my perfect GPA, but chose electives that supported my growing interest in financial technology. My senior thesis expanded on the algorithm project, incorporating the human insights I'd gained from Uncle Frank's practice. Professor Latimer, who supervised the work, was increasingly enthusiastic about its potential. "This has commercial viability," he said during one of our review sessions. "Have you thought about what happens after graduation?" It was the question I'd been avoiding. The assumption had always been that I would join Mitchell Financial, beginning the carefully planned ascension that would eventually lead to taking over when my father retired. Even after the Thanksgiving confrontation, I'd never explicitly rejected this path, partly out of habit, partly out of lingering hope that my father might eventually see value in my ideas. But as graduation approached, that prospect seemed increasingly unlikely. Victor Mitchell hadn't mellowed in his views. During the few family dinners I attended that spring, He spoke of Gregory Thompson's continued success, the firm's expansion, plans, the challenges of maintaining their exclusive client base in a volatile market. There was no mention of technology, innovation, or changing demographics. When he spoke of my future at the firm, it was in terms of learning the established systems, not transforming them. 2 weeks before graduation, I received the expected formal offer from Mitchell Financial, a starting position in client relations, the traditional entry point for promising new analysts. The salary was generous, the benefits excellent, the projected career path clearly outlined, everything a finance graduate could want. I stared at the letter for a long time, trying to imagine the life it represented. Working under my father's watchful eye, implementing strategies I increasingly questioned, serving only clients wealthy enough to meet the firm's minimum investment requirements, slowly climbing a ladder defined by someone else's vision of success. Then I imagined an alternative, the uncertainty and excitement of building something new, the challenge of turning my algorithm into a viable platform. The possibility of failure, yes, but also of creating something that reflected my own values and vision. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with my father at his office. Neutral territory for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. The Mitchell Financial headquarters occupied 3 floors of a prestigious address in Boston's financial district. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered commanding views of the city. Original artwork hung on walls paneled in rich wood. The reception area featured subdued lighting, comfortable leather seating, and fresh flower arrangements changed daily, all designed to convey stability, success, and exclusive access. My father's corner office amplified these messages. Here was the domain of a financial kingmaker, a space where significant decisions were made, where wealth was managed with authority and discretion. I'd visited many times over the years, always aware of the power it represented, the future it promised. Victor Mitchell rose from behind his imposing desk as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Daniel, I wasn't expecting you today." "I wanted to discuss the offer letter," I said, taking a seat across from him. "There's not much to discuss. The terms are generous for an entry-level position. Harrison thought we should start you in portfolio management, but I believe client relations is the right foundation. You'll move up quickly, of course." I took a deep breath. "I'm not accepting the position." My father stilled, his hand frozen in the act of straightening a pen on his desk. "Excuse me?" "I'm grateful for the offer," I continued, "but I've decided to pursue a different path. A different firm? If this is about compensation, we can... Not a different firm. A different approach to finance altogether." I explained my vision. A technology platform that would make sophisticated investment strategies accessible to a broader market. A company that would combine the best aspects of traditional financial advising with the scalability of digital tools. As I spoke, my father's expression hardened. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, regarding me coldly. "So you're still fixated on this app idea? I had hoped your final year would have brought some maturity, some recognition of where true opportunity lies." "This is where I see opportunity, Dad. The financial world is changing. Technology isn't just a tool. It's transforming how people interact with money, with investments, with their financial futures." "And you think you're the one to lead this transformation? With no real-world experience, no client relationships, no capital?" His dismissal stung, but I held firm. "I have to try. I believe in this vision." My father stood, signaling the end of our meeting. "Then you'll be trying it without Mitchell Financial's support. When this tech fantasy inevitably fails, the offer won't still be waiting. Consider that carefully before you make your final decision." I stood as well, meeting his gaze directly. "I have considered it. I'm declining the position." Something flashed in my father's eyes. Anger, certainly, but perhaps something else too. Disappointment? Hurt? It was gone too quickly to identify. As you wish. I hope you know what you're doing, Daniel. As I turned to leave, he added, Your mother will be disappointed. It was a final barb, aimed with precision. My mother, who had always been the buffer between my father's expectations and my own aspirations, who had created spaces for me to breathe within the strict confines of the Mitchell legacy, who would now be caught between her husband's anger and her son's rebellion. I'll speak with her myself, I said, and left before my resolve could waver. That evening, I called my mother and explained my decision as gently as I could. Her silence was worse than any argument. Finally, she said, Are you sure this is what you want, darling? It is, Mom. I need to build something that's truly mine. Her sigh carried decades of navigating my father's uncompromising nature. Your father believes he's protecting you from disappointment. In his mind, the path he's created is the only secure one. I know he thinks that, but I need to find my own way. Just don't burn bridges completely, Daniel. Family remains, even when career paths diverge. It was solid advice, but bridges were already smoldering. When I graduated 2 weeks later, summa cum laude with departmental honors, my parents attended the ceremony. My father shook my hand formally, congratulated me on my academic achievements, and maintained polite conversation during the celebratory dinner afterward. But the warmth that might have accompanied such an occasion was noticeably absent. We spoke around the elephant in the room, my future plans, focusing instead on reminiscences of my childhood, updates on family friends, observations about the ceremony. It was the beginning of a new phase in our relationship, cordial but distant, the closeness of shared purpose replaced by careful navigation around fundamental disagreement. I didn't know then how much wider that gap would grow, or the unlikely circumstances that would eventually bridge it. I only knew that I was stepping away from everything familiar into an uncertain future, guided by nothing but conviction in my vision and determination to prove its value. As I left the restaurant that night, my father shook my hand once more. Good luck with your endeavors, he said, the formality of his words underscoring the distance between us. I hope you find what you're looking for. What I was looking for remained undefined. Success on my own terms, validation of my ideas, perhaps some integration of my father's world and mine. But as I drove away, one thing was certain. The path forward would be entirely my own to forge. Uncle Frank's cottage in Portland felt like stepping into another dimension, one where success was measured by quality of life rather than portfolio size. The cedar-shingled house sat on a modest plot overlooking Casco Bay, close enough to the water that you could hear waves lapping against the shore at night through open windows. Unlike the Mitchell family home in Brookline with its formal rooms and carefully curated art collection, Frank's place had a lived-in warmth. Bookcases overflowing with dog-eared paperbacks, comfortable furniture arranged for conversation rather than impression, and walls decorated with local artists' works and framed photographs of sailing trips. I arrived on a crisp spring afternoon, my BMW looking conspicuously out of place next to Frank's practical Subaru in the gravel driveway. He greeted me with a bear hug, another stark contrast to my father's firm handshakes, and immediately handed me a cold beer. You look like you need this, he said, leading me to the deck, overlooking the water. Boston College is running you ragged, or is it something else? There was something about Frank that inspired honesty. Perhaps it was his direct gaze, so similar to my father's in color but lacking the constant evaluation. Or maybe it was simply that he had always treated me as a person with valid thoughts, rather than an heir being molded for a predetermined role. Whatever the reason, I found myself telling him everything as the afternoon sun began its descent over the bay. My growing passion for financial technology, the algorithm I'd been developing, and most painfully, my father's dismissal of it all at Thanksgiving. "You'll never amount to anything with those ridiculous ideas," I quoted, the words still fresh months later. He said it in front of everyone, Harrison, the Thompsons, Everyone. Frank winced. Victor always did have a gift for the dramatic. Shut down. He took a thoughtful sip of his beer. Your father and I have different definitions of success, always have. For him, it's about accumulation, wealth, status, influence, the Mitchell name on impressive letterhead. And for you? I asked. He gestured toward the bay, where a few sailboats were making their way back to harbor in the fading light. Impact. Meaning, did I help someone navigate rough waters? Did I use what I know to make someone else's journey easier? That's the measure that matters to me. Frank had once been on a trajectory similar to my father's. Ivy League education, promising, start on Wall Street, all the markers of conventional success. But in his early 30s, he'd walked away from a lucrative position to start his boutique consulting practice in Portland, focusing on clients typically ignored by high-end financial firms. Your father called it my midlife crisis about a decade early, Frank laughed. He was convinced I'd come crawling back once I realized what I'd given up. 20 years later, he's still waiting. The next morning, Frank surprised me by asking to see my algorithm. We sat at his kitchen table, morning light streaming through windows that needed washing, as I opened my laptop and walked him through the program. How it analyzed market trends, assessed risk tolerance, and generated personalized investment, strategies that could be implemented without the prohibitive account minimums typical of firms like Mitchell Financial. Your algorithm has promise, he said after I'd finished the demonstration. The technical foundation is solid, but there's something missing. The human element that turns good financial advice into transformative guidance. This wasn't the response I'd expected from the family rebel. That sounds exactly like what my father would say, I pointed out. That relationships matter more than technology. Frank smiled. Victor's not wrong about everything, you know. He's built a successful business because he truly understands what keeps wealthy people up at night. Their fears about preserving what they've built, their hopes for legacy, their desire for security without sacrificing growth potential. What he doesn't see is that those same concerns exist at every economic level, just with different parameters. He closed my laptop and stood up. Grab your jacket. I want to show you something. We spent the day visiting Frank's clients, not in imposing office buildings with security guards and executive elevators, but in their homes, local coffee shops, and small business locations. I met Maria, who owned a thriving bakery and needed guidance on expanding to a second location. John and Sarah, teachers saving for retirement and their daughter's college fund simultaneously. Robert, a widower concerned about having enough to maintain his independence as he aged. What struck me most was how similar these conversations were to what I'd observed in my father's office over the years. The same core concerns about security and growth, just expressed in different contexts with different numbers. And Frank's approach wasn't fundamentally different from Victor Mitchell's methodology. Careful listening, thoughtful analysis, clear explanation of options. The difference was in accessibility, not substance. See what I mean? Frank asked as we drove back to his house after our final meeting. The fundamentals of good financial advising don't change with net worth. People want security, growth, understanding. What changes is access. Who gets the benefit of expertise? That evening, sitting on Frank's deck watching the sunset paint the bay in shades of gold and pink, I began to see a clearer vision for my project. Not a rejection of everything my father had built, but an evolution, taking the core principles that made Mitchell Financial successful and using technology to extend their reach beyond the ultra-wealthy. Your father isn't wrong about everything, Frank said, echoing his earlier point as if reading my thoughts. Relationships do matter. Trust matters. But he's wrong to think innovation threatens those things. The right technology can strengthen relationships, build trust through transparency. That's your advantage, Daniel. You understand both worlds. Those words stayed with me long after I left Portland. Back at Boston College, I approached my algorithm with new perspective, incorporating insights from what I'd observed with Frank. The technical architecture remained, but I added elements that addressed the human concerns I'd seen across different economic brackets, transparent explanations of investment strategies, educational components that built financial literacy, communication tools that fostered trust between advisor and client. Professor Latimer, who supervised my senior thesis expanding on this project, grew increasingly enthusiastic about its potential. "This bridges an important gap," he said during one of our review sessions. "The wealth management industry has traditionally operated in silos, high-end boutique services for the affluent, generic cookie-cutter approaches for everyone else. What you're building could democratize quality advice without sacrificing personalization." As graduation approached, my project evolved from academic exercise to potential business model. Eric, my roommate, helped refine the technical architecture, while offering blunt assessments of my blind spots. "Your user interface assumes financial literacy most people don't have," he pointed out one evening. "You need to make this accessible to someone who's never heard of a basis point." He was right, of course. I'd grown up in a world where financial terminology was dinner table conversation, where concepts like asset allocation and tax loss harvesting were as familiar as sports statistics. Translating that knowledge into something accessible without being condescending became my new challenge. Throughout this period, my relationship with my father remained strained. Our interactions during family dinners were cordial but distant, focused on safe topics like the Red Sox prospects or my mother's charity work. He never asked about my senior thesis or post-graduation plans, an omission that spoke volumes. I, in turn, stopped sharing my developing vision, protecting it from dismissal that would only deepen the growing divide between us. 2 weeks before graduation, the expected formal offer from Mitchell Financial arrived by courier. Heavy cream stationery, embossed letterhead, my father's bold signature at the bottom. The terms were generous for an entry-level position, the projected career path clearly outlined. Everything was exactly as expected, except for my reaction to it. I sat in my dorm room staring at the letter, trying to imagine the life it represented. Working under my father's watchful eye, implementing strategies I increasingly questioned, serving only clients wealthy enough to meet the firm's minimum investment requirements. Slowly climbing a ladder defined by someone else's vision of success. Then I imagined an alternative. The uncertainty and excitement of building something new. The challenge of turning my algorithm into a viable platform. The possibility of failure, yes, but also of creating something that reflected my own values and vision. I knew which path called to me. The question was whether I had the courage to follow it. The next day, I requested a meeting with my father at his office. The Mitchell Financial headquarters occupied 3 floors of a prestigious Boston address, every detail designed to convey stability, success, and exclusive access. My father's corner office, with its commanding views and imposing furniture, had always represented the pinnacle of achievement in my mind. Now, as I sat across from him, it felt like a beautiful cage. "I'm not accepting the position," I said, after minimal preliminaries. My father stilled, his hand frozen in the act of straightening a pen on his desk. "Excuse me?" "I'm grateful for the offer, but I've decided to pursue a different path." "A different firm? If this is about compensation, we can—" "Not a different firm, a different approach to finance altogether." I explained my vision, a technology platform that would make sophisticated investment strategies accessible to a broader market. A company that would combine the best aspects of traditional financial advising with the scalability of digital tools. As I spoke, my father's expression hardened. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, regarding me coldly. "So, you're still fixated on this app idea? I had hoped your final year would have brought some maturity, some recognition of where true opportunity lies." This is where I see opportunity, Dad. The financial world is changing. Technology isn't just a tool, it's transforming how people interact with money, with investments, with their financial futures. And you think you're the one to lead this transformation? With no real-world experience, no client relationships, no capital. His dismissal stung, but I held firm. I have to try. I believe in this vision. My father stood, signaling the end of our meeting. Then you'll be trying it without Mitchell Financial support. When this tech fantasy inevitably fails, the offer won't still be waiting. Consider that carefully before you make your final decision. I stood as well, meeting his gaze directly. I have considered it. I'm declining the position. Something flashed in my father's eyes. Anger, certainly, but perhaps something else too. Disappointment? Hurt? It was gone too quickly to identify. As you wish. I hope you know what you're doing, Daniel. As I turned to leave, he added, Your mother will be disappointed. It was a final barb, aimed with precision. My mother, who had always been the buffer between my father's expectations and my own aspirations, who had created spaces for me to breathe within the strict confines of the Mitchell legacy, who would now be caught between her husband's anger and her son's rebellion. I'll speak with her myself, I said, and left before my resolve could waver. That evening, I called my mother and explained my decision as gently as I could. Her silence was worse than any argument. Finally, she said, Are you sure this is what you want, darling? It is, Mom. I need to build something that's truly mine. Her sigh carried decades of navigating my father's uncompromising nature. Your father believes he's protecting you from disappointment. In his mind, the path he's created is the only secure one. I know he thinks that, but I need to find my own way. Just don't burn bridges completely, Daniel. Family remains, even when career paths diverge. It was solid advice, but bridges were already smoldering. When I graduated 2 weeks later, summa cum laude with departmental honors, my parents attended the ceremony. My father shook my hand formally, congratulated me on my academic achievements, and maintained polite conversation during the celebratory dinner afterward. But the warmth that might have accompanied such an occasion was noticeably absent. We spoke around the elephant in the room, my future plans, focusing instead on reminiscences of my childhood, updates on family friends, observations about the ceremony. The real test of my resolve came a week after graduation. With no job, no office, and only my savings from summer internships to live on, I faced the daunting prospect of building something from nothing. My first move was accepting an offer from Sophia Chen, my former classmate who now worked for the Beacon Street Tech Incubator. We can provide seed funding, office space, and mentorship, she explained when I presented my business plan. In return, we take a small equity stake. It's competitive. We only accept about 5% of applicants, but I think your concept has real potential to disrupt the wealth management space. The application process was rigorous. Multiple rounds of presentations, technical evaluations, and financial projections. I poured everything into it, knowing this opportunity could make the difference between launching my vision and crawling back to Mitchell Financial with my tail between my legs. 2 weeks of anxious waiting later, I received the acceptance email. I was in. The incubator space couldn't have been more different from Mitchell Financial's polished headquarters. Located in a converted warehouse in Boston's Innovation District, Beacon Street was all exposed brick, open floor plans, and communal, spaces designed to foster collaboration between startups. My office consisted of a dedicated desk in a large room shared with other early-stage companies, all of us working to turn ideas into viable businesses. My first task was building a team. Through Professor Latimer's connections, I recruited Jason Kim, a brilliant data scientist who had worked at Goldman Sachs before becoming disillusioned with traditional finance. Eric agreed to come on board part-time while finishing his master's degree, handling the technical architecture that would bring our platform to life. Sophia, impressed by the evolving vision, left her position at the incubator to join as co-founder, bringing her expertise in user experience design and marketing. We worked ridiculous hours those first few months, fueled by takeout food, bottomless coffee, and the particular energy that comes from building something you truly believe in. My savings dwindled rapidly as I covered living expenses while taking only a minimal salary from our seed funding. I moved from my comfortable apartment near campus to a tiny studio in a less desirable neighborhood, cutting costs wherever possible to extend our runway. The algorithm that had begun as a class project evolved into FinMinder, a comprehensive platform designed to make sophisticated financial guidance accessible to a broader market. We built tools that translated complex investment concepts into plain language, created educational components that gradually built financial literacy, and developed a hybrid model that combined automated strategies with access to human advisors when needed. There were countless technical challenges: security protocols that met regulatory requirements, scalable infrastructure, interfaces that made complex concepts intuitive. There were legal hurdles, compliance with financial regulations, proper licensing, privacy protections. There were endless revisions to our business model, pricing structures, customer acquisition strategies, partnership opportunities. Through it all, I never heard from my father. My mother called regularly, carefully avoiding any mention of Victor or Mitchell Financial. Uncle Frank checked in occasionally, offering encouragement and practical advice drawn from his own experience, building a business. But from the man whose approval I'd spent a lifetime seeking, silence. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was building something valuable regardless of his recognition. That success would be the ultimate vindication. But in quiet moments, usually late at night when the office was empty and doubts crept in, I wondered if he might have been right. If I was chasing a fantasy that would inevitably crash against the hard realities of an industry resistant to change. 6 months into development, we hit our first major crisis. A critical security vulnerability was discovered in our prototype, requiring a substantial rebuild of the authentication system. The additional development stretched our already tight budget to the breaking point. We needed another infusion of capital, but our metrics weren't yet strong enough to justify a full funding round. "We need a bridge loan," Sophia said during an emergency team meeting. "Just enough to get us to the beta launch. Then we can demonstrate real user adoption and raise a proper Series A." We approached several angel investors who had expressed initial interest, but the combination of our inexperience and the security setback made them hesitant. 3 weeks of rejections later, we were facing the very real possibility of shutting down before even launching. I considered briefly approaching my father. Mitchell Financial had an investment arm that occasionally funded promising startups. But the thought of presenting myself as a supplicant, of having my vision evaluated and quite possibly rejected again by Victor Mitchell, was unbearable. I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed on his. Instead, I called Uncle Frank. Not to ask for money. His boutique practice was successful but hardly flush with investment capital. But for advice on navigating this first real crisis. To my surprise, he offered to make introductions to several of his clients who had invested in early-stage companies. "They're not the mega-wealthy venture capitalists your father knows," he cautioned. "But they understand the value of what you're building, because they're exactly the kind of clients who would benefit from it." Those introductions led to a critical $300,000 bridge investment, enough to get us through the security rebuild and to our beta launch. The terms weren't as favorable as they might have been with institutional investors, but the capital came with something equally valuable. Our first real advocates, people who believed in our mission enough to put their money behind it. The beta launch, 8 months after we'd started development, was both terrifying and exhilarating. We invited 500 users, drawn primarily from connections through Frank's practice and the incubator network, to test our platform, The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with a few critical observations that helped us refine the user experience. "This makes me feel like I have a financial advisor in my pocket," wrote one tester, a school teacher who had previously relied on generic online advice. "For the first time, I understand why my money is invested the way it is, and I feel confident making decisions." Comments like these validated our core premise that quality financial guidance could be democratized without sacrificing personalization. We weren't just building a robo-advisor that applied generic algorithms to basic financial profiles. We were creating a system that genuinely educated users while providing strategies tailored to their specific situations. The positive reception from our beta testers gave us the metrics we needed to approach institutional investors for a proper funding round. Sophia led the pitch development, transforming our technical capabilities and user feedback into a compelling narrative about market opportunity and growth potential. Our timing was fortunate. Fintech was beginning to attract serious venture capital attention, with several major funding announcements making headlines that quarter. We secured meetings with 5 reputable firms, each managing funds specifically targeted at financial innovation. I knew these presentations had to be perfect. Unlike the informal pitches to angel investors who were primarily evaluating our team and concept, institutional VCs would scrutinize every aspect of our business model, technical architecture, and market analysis. I prepared obsessively, anticipating questions, refining our financial projections, practicing responses to potential criticisms. The night before our first major pitch, I received an unexpected text from Harrison Wells, my father's longtime partner at Mitchell Financial. "Heard you're meeting with Granite Ventures tomorrow. Victor doesn't know I'm contacting you. Call if you want some insight on their investment style. They're former clients." I stared at the message for a long time, surprised by this olive branch from within my father's organization. Harrison had always been kind to me, but his loyalty to Victor was well established. This offer of help felt significant, an acknowledgement that whatever my father thought of my venture, others in his circle saw potential in it. I called him, and the conversation proved invaluable. Harrison provided detailed background on Granite's investment philosophy, their concerns about traditional finance, and the questions they typically asked fintech founders. "They'll probe hard on your customer acquisition strategy," he advised. "Their biggest concern with fintech platforms is the cost of bringing users on board relative to lifetime value." Armed with this insight, I adjusted our presentation to address these concerns proactively. The Granite meeting went exceptionally well, with the partners asking increasingly detailed questions that suggested serious interest. 3 more pitches followed over the next 2 weeks, each benefiting from Harrison's continued counsel. When the dust settled, we had 3 term sheets offering various funding structures. After careful consideration and negotiation, we accepted Granite's offer, $4. $2 million in Series A funding at a valuation that made my head spin. I sent Harrison a bottle of his favorite scotch with a simple note. "Thank you for the insight. It made all the difference." His reply came the next day. "Congratulations. Well deserved. Your father doesn't know about our conversations, and I think it's best to keep it that way for now." I understood the subtext. Victor Mitchell was still not ready to acknowledge the legitimacy of my path. Any suggestion that his own partner was supporting me would be seen as a betrayal. The rift between us remained as wide as ever. With secure funding and growing user interest, FinMinder moved into its next phase. We left the incubator space for proper offices in downtown Boston, not the prestigious address of Mitchell Financial, but a bright, modern space that reflected our identity as a company bridging traditional finance and technology innovation. We expanded our team, bringing on developers, financial analysts, marketing specialists, and customer support staff. As we grew, I maintained the dual focus that had shaped our concept from the beginning: technological innovation combined with genuine understanding of client needs. Each new feature was evaluated not just for its technical elegance, but for how it served our core mission of democratizing quality financial guidance. We added capabilities that addressed the concerns I'd seen across economic brackets during those visits with Uncle Frank: tools for education funding, retirement planning, debt management, and wealth preservation. 18 months after that painful Thanksgiving dinner where my father had dismissed my ideas so completely, FinMinder officially launched to the public. The response exceeded our most optimistic projections. Financial publications praised our hybrid approach that combined algorithmic efficiency with human guidance. User adoption grew steadily, with high retention rates that validated our focus on education and transparency. We weren't directly competing with Mitchell Financial. Our target markets were different, our approach distinct. But the industry took notice nonetheless. Traditional wealth management firms began announcing their own digital initiatives, though most amounted to little more than online portals for existing clients, rather than true innovations in service delivery. I never mentioned my father or Mitchell Financial in interviews, positioning FinMinder as addressing a market gap rather than challenging established players. But privately, each milestone we achieved felt like a quiet refutation of those dismissive words. You'll never amount to anything with those ridiculous ideas. 2 years after our launch, with FinMinder serving over 50,000 users and preparing for a Series B funding round, I was invited to speak at the Northeast Financial Innovation Conference, a prestigious industry event attended by everyone from traditional banking executives to cutting-edge fintech founders. My presentation on democratizing wealth management through technology was scheduled for the main stage on the final day. I knew there was a strong possibility my father would be there. Mitchell Financial regularly sent representatives to these conferences, and Victor himself often attended when the agenda included networking opportunities with high-net-worth investors. But I hadn't seen him in almost a year, our last interaction being a strained conversation at my cousin's wedding, where we'd maintained polite distance. The morning of my presentation, I spotted him in the audience, front row, center, his posture as impeccable as ever, his attention focused on the current speaker. My stomach tightened. I hadn't prepared for this. Despite all we'd achieved, despite the validation from investors and users and industry experts, I suddenly felt like that college student at the Thanksgiving table again, presenting ideas only, to have them summarily dismissed. I considered approaching him before my talk, perhaps diffusing the tension with a casual greeting. But as I watched him networking during the break, moving confidently through groups of admiring colleagues, I decided against it. Whatever happened, I would let my presentation speak for itself. When my turn came, I took the stage with outward confidence that masked inner turmoil. From the podium, I could see my father clearly, his expression neutral, giving nothing away. I launched into my prepared remarks, explaining FinMinder's origins, our hybrid approach to financial guidance, and the market gap we were addressing. Traditional wealth management offers extraordinary value, I said, careful to acknowledge the industry that my father had helped shape. The personalized guidance, the deep expertise, the relationship-based trust, these are powerful tools for financial success. But they've historically been available only to those with significant assets. I clicked to a slide showing income distribution alongside access to financial services. 70% of American households have no access to personalized financial guidance. Not because they don't need it, they absolutely do, but because the economics of traditional advising doesn't work for smaller portfolios. Throughout my presentation, I maintained this balanced approach, respecting the value of traditional services while demonstrating how technology could extend their reach. I never once glanced directly at my father, afraid that seeing his reaction might throw me off balance. When I finished, the applause was enthusiastic. The Q&A session that followed was lively, with thoughtful questions about our technology, business model, and future plans. Through it all, Victor Mitchell remained in his seat, his expression unreadable. As I stepped down from the stage, Colleagues and potential partners surrounded me with business cards and follow-up questions. By the time I extracted myself from these conversations, my father had disappeared from the conference hall. I told myself I wasn't disappointed, that his opinion no longer mattered, that FinMinder's success spoke for itself. That evening, the conference hosted a reception at the hotel bar, one of those networking events that combine awkward small talk with serious business development. I was deep in conversation with a potential banking partner when I felt a presence at my elbow. Turning, I found myself face to face with my father. "Your presentation was impressive," he said, his tone neutral but not unkind. "You speak well." Coming from Victor Mitchell, this constituted high praise. I managed a nod. "Thank you. Harrison tells me your user metrics are strong, that you're preparing for another funding round." So Harrison had been keeping him informed, despite our supposed secrecy. I wasn't entirely surprised. Loyalties in the financial world were complex, and Harrison's primary allegiance had always been to my father. "We are," I confirmed. "The response has exceeded our projections." My father nodded, taking a sip of his scotch. "The market is changing, more rapidly than many of us anticipated." This seemed to cost him something to admit. "Your approach has merit." The compliment, hesitant as it was, caught me off guard. 2 years of silence, and now this cautious acknowledgement. I searched for an appropriate response, something that bridged the professional and personal divide between us. Before I could speak, Gregory Thompson approached, clapping a hand on my father's shoulder. "Victor, there you are. The Porters are asking for you. Something about their daughter's trust fund." My father nodded to Thompson, then turned back to me. "We should continue this conversation another time." He handed me his card, an unnecessary gesture given that I had his contact information memorized, and moved away to attend to his clients. I stood there, the heavy cardstock between my fingers, wondering if this brief exchange constituted an olive branch or merely professional courtesy to a rising industry figure. Either way, it was more acknowledgement than I'd received in the 2 years since launching FinMinder. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I received a text from Harrison. "Victor mentioned speaking with you. First time he's discussed FinMinder without dismissing it. Progress." Progress indeed, though of what kind remained unclear. Was it simply that my father could no longer deny FinMinder's success? Or was there something more personal, a father's grudging pride in a son who had found his own path despite, or perhaps because of, opposition? Whatever the case, I returned to Boston with renewed focus. The brief exchange with my father, while hardly a reconciliation, had removed a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged was there. For 2 years, I'd been building FinMinder with dual motivations: belief in our mission and desire to prove my father wrong. Now, with even his minimal acknowledgement, I could focus entirely on the former. The months that followed brought accelerated growth. Our Series B funding closed successfully, valuing FinMinder at $120 million, a figure that still seemed surreal to me. We expanded our team to 60 employees and moved to larger offices. Industry publications began listing us among the fintech companies to watch, and larger financial institutions approached us about potential partnerships. Through this period of expansion, I occasionally heard from Harrison about Mitchell Financial's activities. Their core business remained strong, but they were losing younger clients to more tech-savvy competitors. Victor had finally authorized development of a client portal, but it was essentially a digital viewing platform for existing services rather than a true innovation. He still doesn't fully understand how fundamentally technology is changing client expectations, Harrison confided during one of our occasional lunches. He sees digital tools as an add-on to traditional services, not as the foundation for an entirely new approach. I nodded, familiar with this perspective. It wasn't unique to my father. Many established players in finance viewed technology as an enhancement to existing business models rather than a transformative force. But as FinMinder's growth demonstrated, clients increasingly expected more than digital window dressing on traditional services. They wanted transparency, accessibility, education, elements that required rethinking fundamental assumptions about how financial guidance should be delivered. 3 years after our launch, with FinMinder serving over 100,000 users and generating consistent revenue, I received an unexpected invitation. My father asked me to join him for lunch at the Charles Hotel, a neutral location where Boston's business elite often conducted discreet meetings. The invitation came through his assistant rather than directly, maintaining a formal distance even in this gesture of connection. I arrived precisely on time, knowing punctuality was a non-negotiable value in Victor Mitchell's world. My father was already seated, studying a menu he probably knew by heart, given how frequently he entertained clients there. He stood when he saw me, extending his hand in that familiar, firm grip. "Daniel, thank you for coming." I took the seat across from him, noting the subtle signs of aging that had appeared since I'd last seen him up close. More gray at his temples, deeper lines around his eyes. Still formidable, still commanding, but mortal in a way that hadn't been apparent before. After ordering and exchanging minimal pleasantries about my mother's health and the unusual weather, my father got to the point, another trait I'd inherited from him. "Mitchell Financial is at a crossroads," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Our traditional client base remains loyal, but we're not capturing the next generation. The children of our clients are increasingly moving their inheritances to more technologically oriented advisors, including FinMinder, though he didn't specify this. We had indeed seen an influx of younger clients who had initially been with traditional firms like Mitchell Financial. We've made attempts to adapt," he continued. "Digital portals, mobile apps, virtual meeting options. But the results have been underwhelming. Our technical infrastructure wasn't built for these capabilities, and our culture hasn't embraced them effectively." I listened carefully, sensing there was more to this lunch than my father sharing business challenges. Victor Mitchell didn't admit vulnerability without purpose. "Harrison suggested I speak with you," he said finally. "He believes there might be synergies between our organizations." The word hung in the air between us. Synergies, the corporate euphemism for mergers, acquisitions, consolidations. Was my father suggesting what it seemed he was suggesting? What kind of synergies did Harrison have in mind? I asked cautiously. My father took a deliberate sip of water. "Mitchell Financial has what FinMinder lacks: an established client base with significant assets, a proven track record spanning decades, and trusted relationships with high-net-worth families. FinMinder has what we need: technological infrastructure, designed for today's expectations, innovative service delivery models, and appeal to younger investors." He set down his glass precisely. "I'm proposing we explore a potential merger." I nearly choked on my water. A merger? After years of dismissing my vision, my father was now suggesting our companies combine? "I'm surprised," I managed. "An understatement of epic proportions." "Business requires adaptation," he said simply. "Mitchell Financial needs to evolve, and acquiring technological capabilities would be more efficient than building them internally. FinMinder could benefit from our established client relationships and capital resources." His framing was purely rational, as if this were any other business proposition rather than a profound shift in our personal dynamic. But I knew Victor Mitchell well enough to recognize that this approach, clinical, strategic, emotionless, was his way of managing a difficult conversation. "This would be complicated," I said carefully, "both organizationally and personally." He nodded once, acknowledging the understatement. "Yes, but potentially beneficial to both entities. A pause, and perhaps to both of us. It was as close as Victor Mitchell would ever come to suggesting reconciliation. Not through emotional appeals or explicit apologies, but through a business proposition that acknowledged the value of what I'd built. "I'll need to discuss this with my team and board," I said, not committing to anything. "There would be significant logistical and cultural challenges to consider." "Of course." He signaled for the check. "Take whatever time you need. This isn't a decision to be made hastily." As we stood to leave, my father hesitated, then said something that caught me completely off guard. "Your algorithm," he began, referencing the project he'd dismissed so completely at that fateful Thanksgiving dinner. The core concept was sound. I should have recognized that. It wasn't exactly an apology. Victor Mitchell didn't apologize. He reassessed, adjusted, moved forward. But it was an acknowledgement that his dismissal had been wrong, that the ridiculous ideas he'd claimed would amount to nothing had in fact amounted to something significant enough that he now wanted to acquire them. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, genuinely moved by this concession. He nodded once more, then extended his hand in a formal farewell. But as we shook, he added quietly, "Your mother would appreciate seeing more of you. Sunday dinner, perhaps, when you're available." It was a small invitation back into family life, offered alongside the business proposition. Both represented potential bridges across the chasm that had developed between us. One professional, one personal. As I walked away from the Charles Hotel that afternoon, I felt strangely light. Not because I was considering accepting my father's proposal, that would require careful thought and consultation with my team, but because in his own way, Victor Mitchell had finally acknowledged that I had amounted to something after all. That the path I'd chosen, despite his opposition, had led to something valuable. Whether our companies merged or remained separate, whether our relationship healed or maintained its cautious distance, that acknowledgement meant something. Not because I still needed his approval, I'd moved beyond that need in building FinMinder, but because it represented a kind of closing of a circle, a resolution to the challenge he'd unintentionally laid down at that Thanksgiving table years ago. "You'll never amount to anything with those ridiculous ideas." But I had, and now even Victor Mitchell couldn't deny it. Standing in the lobby of Mitchell Financial Solutions as its new owner, I adjusted my tie as employees hurried past. Some offered nervous smiles, others averted their eyes. 3 months had passed since the acquisition was finalized. 3 months of integration meetings, culture clashes, and sleepless nights. The merger wasn't what I'd initially planned. After my father's lunch invitation, I'd expected months of negotiation. Instead, events accelerated when quarterly reports revealed Mitchell Financial had lost several major clients to tech-forward competitors. Their stock plummeted. Our board saw opportunity. The acquisition terms gave my father the chairman emeritus title, preserving dignity while transferring control to FinMinder. Most of his team stayed, including Gregory Thompson, who proved surprisingly adaptable once he understood the vision. My father's corner office remained untouched. I chose a different space, symbolic of building something new rather than replacing what existed. The Mitchell name remained on the letterhead, now joined by FinMinder's logo. Today marked our first all-hands meeting. As I entered the conference room, conversations hushed. My father sat in the front row, posture perfect as always. Our eyes met briefly, his expression unreadable. "Welcome to the first day of Mitchell FinMinder Solutions," I began. "We're combining two traditions: excellence in personalized financial guidance and innovative technology that extends that guidance to more people. Not replacing, but evolving." As I outlined our vision, I noticed my father nodding slightly at key points. When the presentation ended, he approached the podium and extended his hand. "Congratulations," he said simply, the word carrying more meaning than its syllables suggested. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation or emotional embrace. It was acknowledgement, recognition that his dismissive words years ago had been proven wrong. I had amounted to something after all. And somehow, that was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.